Testing 1 2 3. All right. So, this is a new experiment. I'm not sure how this will work out or if it's of any interest to anyone. But yeah, so I've been doing a lot of reading over the past few years, right? And I've just been looking around for people to read and discuss various texts with. So I started these reading rooms where people can just come and go casually, read various texts related to psychology, philosophy, spirituality, religion, mythology. And yeah, that's the premise. So today is so the setup here is that so let me, OBS is complaining at me. Let me see what I can do here. Output. Okay. Let's see. Should be on live stream. Let me make sure. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, so this is a bit different from the events I've usually been hosting, because this is like a more casual and regular format. I figured I'd do kind of like a live stream version where it's just like a public room. It's being live streamed on Twitch and YouTube, and so it's an open space. People can come and go as they please. So if there's anyone in the audience, you can interact via chat on Twitch or YouTube, wherever you found this, or you can join the Zoom discussion room or the Zoom meeting that I'm in right now, and we can discuss the text as we read it via voice chat. So yeah, I plan on regularly hosting this room. It's just a reading room for about an hour and a half. I think I scheduled it for most nights. So if anyone's interested in that, come by. Let's read and discuss these texts. Okay, so today I've chosen the essential Rene Guénon. So Rene Guénon was a metaphysician. This is him. A Freemason, a mathematician, and I think later on he joined some variant of Sufi. He joined some variant of Sufism. I think I'm not exactly sure on that, but yeah, so I read his Crisis of the Modern World. So I think many people, in this age have been looking for answers I mean, we've always been looking for answers, right? But just there's so many doomsday scenarios are floating around there. You know, political doomsday, nuclear war, pandemic, AI is going to take over, aliens, just so on and so forth. I mean, just, you know, so many problems, which isn't necessarily new for humanity. It's just, it seems like now in this ever connected world, in this ever more, or in this increasingly interconnected world, it seems like, you know, that global catastrophes are more and more likely. That affects not just a nation or a region of the world, but all of humanity itself. And so in these times, I think many of us are looking for answers, looking for a greater understanding of man. And I certainly am myself, and that has brought me to look at texts like this, and traditions and thinkers that are ordinarily discarded or, you know, put to the side, and just ignored because their views, their ideas are not consistent with the mainstream dogma. And so, yeah, I read René Guénon's The Crisis of the Modern World, and many things he said resonated with me, especially this idea of the cyclical nature of the world, and how you know, at the beginning it's like you have contact with that primordial, like, creative force, the divine, but then as the civilization continues, like, it grows basically more worldly and away from the divine principle, and that expansion basically leads to a cataclysm, a crisis, that then, you know, is basically like a death that then initiates the next cycle. So there's like these death, rebirth cycles that correspond to, in some sense, coming into contact with the divine and straying away from the divine, which what that word means, divine, is, you know, that's a symbol for something. But yeah, I mean, so things like that, you know, traditionalism, the idea of like a hierarchy that's supposed to, a social hierarchy that's supposed to reflect, or is supposed to embody these metaphysical principles. All very interesting ideas. And then, of course, Guénon has a scathing critique of modernity, and why it's a crisis through the lens of traditionalism, and in Guénon's view, through the lens of metaphysics, that there seems to be a, like, modernity is like metaphysically evil. That's what I've picked up from Guénon, and he explains why that is, you know, in his terms. And, you know, I don't know what to really make of all this. I mean, I don't know if it's all a projection, you know, is Guinan projecting, you know, kind of like a personal understanding onto, you know, something that's supposedly impartial and metaphysical? I'm not sure, you know, but certainly you can sense, like, reading it, there's something to it, and I think it's interesting to contemplate. So anyway, so the idea here is that if no one shows up to talk about it, I'm just going to read and just comment on the text myself. If people do join, then we'll have a discussion about it. I'm also open to switching books. If anyone wants to switch up, go to something else, we can do that as well. So here's a preface from the author. So this is a collection of Guinan's writings, and this preface is by the compiler of this collection. And yeah, so let's read it and get a kind of picture of the scope of Guinan's writing and why it may be important for us to check out. The respective worldviews of tradition and science frame the nature of reality in starkly contrasting ways. And in this divided house of our time, it is clear which of the two views has gained the greater share of our attention and respect. The rational, material, and secular worldview of modern science threatens to overwhelm the traditional human quest for the metaphysical and spiritual realities that underlie the grand design of the natural world. The ascending ladder of the multiple states of being no longer inspires the mind to reach beyond itself. The hierarchical orders of knowledge have vanished in the midst. The great cycles of the cosmos have been rolled up like an ancient scroll, and eternity and an infinity have been reduced to the here and now of sensorial perception. An intellectual and moral haze hangs around our souls and obscures the promise of supreme mystery that awakens human consciousness to a vision beyond the stars. So yes, just a bit of commentary. So the metaphysicians, people like Rene Guénon, believe that there is this truth, there is this divine order that ultimately is not subject to the wiles of humanity. Like, all we can really do is kind of embody it. You know, Guénon seemed to believe in truth with a capital T. You know, but you know, rationalism, science, tends to think that, well, truth is something that's continually, we're constantly trying to approximate, like, what the truth is. And also, there's this idea in science that humanity is ultimately just kind of a natural phenomenon, just like every other phenomenon. And we don't necessarily occupy a privileged place in the hierarchy of the natural world. So science kind of mocks, or modern rationalism mocks, humanity's desire to reach up out of the material world and grasp something that is immutable. So yeah, there's a tremendous clash here in these different views. So let's continue reading. Already early in the 20th century, René Guénon identified the deep chasm that separates ancient from modern, sacred from profane, and true knowledge from empirical science, a series of deep wounds such as can fully be healed only by the ending of this cosmic cycle and the beginning of another. It is surprising that a person emerged to explain the nature of the great divide we experience as spiritual beings living in an anti-spiritual world of our own making. Is it surprising that a person emerged to explain the nature of the great divide we experience as spiritual beings living in an anti-spiritual world of our own making? Is it a surprise? The answer must be a resounding no, given the beneficence of heaven. Do we, however, still have the capacity to appreciate the message of this voice that speaks to us from across the decades like a grand patriarch and true visionary? The answer must be an equally resounding yes, given the native intelligence of the human heart. The burden of our age lies in responding to Guénon's penetrating critique of the modern world and his assessment of its near total state of disarray. Guénon resurrected a truly universal vision that draws upon an ultimate mystery that was revealed at the beginning of time and which continues to haunt the dark night of the modern soul with its promise of unity and perfection. Are we in today's sophisticated world willing to heed the warning of this man whose message has struck a celestial chord, or do our hearts only feel the faint rhythms of a distant bell that will never be struck in reality? In the 1970s, I came across a dusty little hardback with a cracked spine that had been published during the Second World War, entitled The Crisis of the Modern World. The title struck me like the sting of a whip, with its seemingly accusatory reference to the modern world, a world in which I had been raised to believe in the myth of a progressive technological society that was on the brink of a brave new world. After briefly skimming its foreword, I reached into my pocket for the dollar bill that would buy me this treasure. So yeah, the myth of a progressive technical society. So that's another thing that, so this is a chief critique, point of critique for Guénon. Modernity, and I know we're kind of like living in postmodernism now, but the modernity, the ideology of modernity was constructed, upon this sense of progress. But tradition, the worldview that Guénon espouses or represents, is actually completely, against that. The idea that the traditionalist worldview is that there is no progress, really. There is the, there are particular structures of society and there are certain truths, and ultimately we thrive and are doomed according to how well we embody those structures, how we order ourselves, according to those eternal truths, which you can see play out in, the religions of the world, right? This idea that we have the truth, we know the truth, just stick to it, and if you stick to it, everything's going to be fine. But if you deviate from the truth, you're screwed. You're gonna end up in hell. You're gonna end up in a nightmare. Everything's gonna collapse. But of course, the modern world has a different approach. Modernity has a different approach. It says, well, no, everything is continually changing. We're the arc of history is one of progress. That we are slowly emerging from archaic forms and developing ever greater forms of social organization, and we're also always improving our knowledge. We know more every year. We just know more. There's progress. But that's not at all what Guinan believed. And in fact, he believed that what we call progress in the modern world is actually just a symptom of decline. And I guess you could put it like this. Suppose you have hospitals everywhere and doctors everywhere. You may look at that and say, whoa, there's doctors and hospitals everywhere. That means we must have a healthy society because there's all this healthcare. But that's obviously not a good way of reasoning, right? Because if there's all these hospitals and all these doctors around, then that implies actually an unhealthy society, right? Because if we're all healthy, we wouldn't need these, we wouldn't need doctors and hospitals, right? We wouldn't need so many of them. So the fact that we have all these hospitals and doctors around, that would be a symptom of ill health. So I'm just using this as an analogy. So he's saying, when we look at all these inventions, all these little contraptions that we've made and we use today in the modern world, these things are just symptoms of our spiritual decline. Like, for example, like TV, internet, just all these different things that we distract ourselves with, right? Why do we need all those things? Well, because we're constantly running away, fleeing from our internal poverty. So we need more in the world. We need more things to entertain ourselves. We constantly have greater and greater needs because we're increasingly spiritually deprived. So the inner void drives like an external hunger, or a hunger for the external. And therefore we invest in it, right? We care a great deal about the new toys that we can make and so on and so forth. Because that is the thing, those are the things we're using to fill the internal void. And that fuels material progress. But if we were fulfilled spiritually, then we wouldn't need those things. We would just be content with gathering and, appreciating nature, for example. If we had this rich internal life, then all we would need is ourselves and others, and we would just be happy. But the more impoverished we become internally, the more we need a crutch. So that is a sketch, I think, of Guinan's reasoning, about this, why what we call progress is really just, and all the fruits of progress really is just a symptom of decline. Of course he has more intricate arguments for this. Okay, anyway, let me continue. In this short but intense book, referring to the crisis of the modern world, Guinan invokes such notions as a primordial spirituality, now obscured, truths once within the reach of all, that are now hidden and inaccessible, and the absence of principle that now dominates today's anti-traditional worldview. It was as though someone had lowered a bucket into the well of my being, allowing me to draw upon our deepest resources, the water of pure spirituality that lives within human nature. In buying the book, I had unknowingly sown the seeds of a new understanding that in time would lead me out into the cul-de-sac of the modern world and point me down the path of a spiritual future. 30 years later, having read through the entire range of the Guinanian corpus, I feel that I have emptied myself of the false hopes and opaque dreams that the modern world offers the unsuspecting soul. I have immersed myself instead in a comprehensive body of traditional knowledge that is not as distant as thunder and as fragile as ashes as the promises of the modern world, but that exists as a living reality, open to those who partake in one of the orthodox pathways that lead back to God. Guinan is considered one of the founders, together with Frithjof Schuon, and Amanda, I never learned how to pronounce his name, Ananda Kumaraswamy, of the traditionalist or perennialist school of thinking that has flowered in the present era. Schuon wrote that in a series of remarkable works, Guinan took upon himself the task of interpreting the still living intellectuality of the East, and more especially India, while this guy characterized him as the bearer of a lost and forgotten knowledge of the universal experience of movement along the axis mundi of the ascent towards the absolute. Martin Lings, a close friend of Guinan during his final years in Cairo, revealed that he was conscious of being a pioneer, one who reminded the modern world of the need for orthodoxy through revelation, followed by a tradition that can preserve the revelation in some practical manner from generation to generation. Much of Guinan's writing could be described as a meditation on the first principle that there must exist a non-individual, non-formal body of knowledge, a primordial tradition which acts like the hub of a cosmic wheel whose spokes radiate outwards into the world of formal manifestation. Through this emphasis on metaphysical knowledge as the source material for the great world religions, Guinan prepared the way for an understanding of what Schuon described as the transcendent unity of the world's religious traditions, wherein each religion casts the same universal truth within the mold of an individual form that suits a particular mentality and a given era. As to the question of the source or derivation of the metaphysical doctrines of this one primordial tradition, Guénon states emphatically that the origin of tradition, if indeed the word origin has any place at all in such a case, is as non-human as is metaphysics itself. In his mind, metaphysical truth is eternal. It is all the rest that is subject to change and contingency. Yes. So this is a really appealing aspect of Guénon's writings to me, or his outlook. This idea of a primordial tradition, that really is almost functionally similar to the archetypes that Jung talks about. So in Jungian psychology, there's this notion of archetypes which are, common or that are inherited forms, or you could say they're inherited structures that shape the psyche, but they manifest themselves in culturally different ways. Hence why, the mythology of various civilizations is different, but they share common themes. So yeah, this idea of there being this like primordial energy or spirituality, something that is, ultimately formless. It then, this notion of the formless somehow coming into contact with human beings, and then human beings basically translating the formless into something that has a form. And then that form supposedly is supposedly supposed to represent the formless. And so what we have in all the world's religious traditions and spiritual movements, what we would have there, according to this view, is in all these cases we have forms of the formless, if you will. And yeah, that's quite interesting. And one could see perhaps why this causes so many problems, right? Because really it's not possible to represent something that's formless. Apparently, when the formless is represented in forms, those forms are supposed to somehow have an effect on us that attunes us to the formless essence of the divine, if you will. But it seems that these forms of the formless lose their function. I mean, or become dysfunctional over time, and then they no longer serve as ways of helping us attune with the formless or the divine. And so that's when we have religions that no longer function. People go to worship and they read these books, but they don't even understand what they're reading anymore. It has no effect. It's not a living myth, if you will. It's not active. It's not a spiritual experience. It's not it doesn't engender a spiritual experience anymore. It's just an empty formalism. And this Carl Jung also complained about. So I see some parallels here between Guénon and Jung. The primordial tradition, again, being something that sounds like... So it says here, there must be a non-individual. So I read that as collective, non-formal body, maybe unconscious, of knowledge, which acts as a hub of a cosmic... All that other stuff, yeah, we could get into. But this sounds like archetype to me. And then there's this idea, again, that the religions cast this primordial tradition in various forms. And that's, Jung talks about the archetypes manifesting itself in different myths. So yeah, it's all very interesting. So just to continue, in the Guénonian worldview, the thinking man or woman is by nature a metaphysician, and only later a scientist, teacher, or craftsman. So that's another huge difference between Guénon and the scientists. So in his world, in his line of thinking, and it's shared among many people of his ilk, truth is something that can be directly perceived by the intellect and does not require any mediation. So, like looking at the world for truth, for example, from this worldview, from the metaphysical worldview, that's an absurd idea. Because the intuition is able to directly contact, or is able to come into direct contact with the truth. And that's the only way to really get at the truth with capital T. But if you look at the world, you're just really seeing something like a world of shadows. The truth isn't there. There's just the dead forms. But the living, formless source, that is something that can only be accessed from within through the intellect, through contemplation, through metaphysics, as Guénon calls it. So yeah, we see here a radically different worldview, where science and the arts, so on, are seen as subordinate to metaphysics. So, as we continue, as metaphysicians, we are equipped with inner faculties and senses not only to navigate our way through this world, but also to see things in themselves, just as our forefather Adam by knowing the names of things, knew their inner meaning in principle and as part of human nature. We can perceive this essential knowledge through the intellect with its capacity to capture directly and without question the nature of reality, a revelatory perception that paves the way for human consciousness to reach higher realms of spiritual awareness. So, in the modern, in today's age, right, this idea is wholeheartedly despised. The idea that somehow man can, reach the truth through intellect alone, and really that's the only way of actually coming into the truth, through the intellect, and that anything external is not really the truth. Yeah, I mean, this is hated. And one wonders why it's hated. Is it hated? Is this view despised because it's not accurate? It's false? Or is it despised because we've lost this ability? And we now have to deal with the fact that we are inferior kinds of human beings that can no longer do this, that no longer have that intellectual power to, as it says here, capture directly and without question the nature of reality, to perceive directly the essential knowledge, the inner nature of all things through the intellect. If it is true that we are in a period of the cosmic cycle, if it is true that we are in a period where we've lost this capacity, then I think it's quite natural that we would despise it, because it reminds us that we are products of a de-evolution, that we aren't actually at the pinnacle, that we're products of a decline. And that seems to be too much for our egos to bear. I mean, just think about how much we pride ourselves on being, the latest and greatest. There's a lot in that pride. But what if it was unfounded? What if modern humans weren't the latest and greatest? What if we've experienced a kind of mutilation and a descent into a lower nature? Naturally, if that is the case, then as lower order human beings, we would hate the thing that makes us aware of our own inadequacies and shame. And I think that's borne out by ordinary experience. I mean, people do tend to hate those who make them look bad. And so, yeah, so I think that this is all at play here. I don't think modernity hates this view just because it's false. They hate it with a passion, because it would make us look so bad. Today, and just continuing, today, sadly, this capacity often goes unused, for we see the forms of things and want to know what they can do for us, but we are not interested in what lies beyond the outer shell. We see an object, but no horizon, and we hear a myth that entertains us, but no meaning beyond the telling of the tale. We are aware of this man and that woman, but not of the soul and the spirit that vivifies the human form. People today are searching for something, though they may not know what exactly. What they instinctively feel lacking within themselves is precisely what Guanon has endeavored to proclaim and preserve in the hearts of modern-day generations who need not be irrevocably excluded from the knowledge that, since time immemorial, has effectively resolved the mystery of life and proved a sense of wonder. Imagine a sacred wand that has the power to transform existential truths into celestial realities. Picture a universal symbol that, when gazed upon, could raise human consciousness to a higher order of perception, or a word that, when remembered, could transform nature's images into archetypal verities of a transcendent order, truths that trace their source and ultimate origin to a primordial tradition that leads us back to the edge of time. What Guanon has accomplished is nothing less than the restatement of the traditional doctrines, rites of worship, and universal symbols, and planted them as the seeds they were meant to be within the ground of the human soul. Wow. Quite poetic. So yeah, I mean, in all this, we have this idea here that we have that we've lost something, and maybe it's like an echo of Genesis, the book of Genesis. The fall of man, as told as the story of Adam's eating of the forbidden fruit. So we see a similar thing being said here, that once man was able to, perceives things as they truly are, to look upon the inner nature of things with his intellect. But now man has fallen, and so we only see the external and nothing else, and everything now is a shadow. Yeah. So Guanon, is clearly describing something like a fall, a descent. Four adjectives come to mind that help characterize Guinan's unique style, exactness, intelligibility, harmony, and purity. His writing displays a mathematical precision on all planes, a clarity of language that bespeaks a spiritual intelligence, a harmony of composition that is remarkably consistent throughout his oeuvre, and a crystalline purity of style. Glimpses of Guinan, the man, may occasionally shine through his sober intellectual style, but essentially he remains in the shadows, allowing instead his spirit to shine through the art of his language and the depth of his perceptions. In order to give some definition and shape to the vast array of subjects Guinan wrote about, ranging from pure metaphysics to the symbolism of the Holy Grail, we have chosen to group selected excerpts of his writings under four headings: the modern world, the metaphysical world, the Hindu world, and the traditional world. Each part has its own clear identity and relevance for today's readership, and taken together, they provide a point of departure for readers who have enduring questions about the source and nature of metaphysical knowledge, the role of the world religions in preserving the traditional doctrines, and the means and methods of spiritual realization. These sections may be described briefly as follows. Part 1. The modern world. Guinan identifies a crisis of the modern world that, in keeping with the Hindu cosmological principle of cycles, could lead to the end of this particular world, and by doing so he touches a nerve that is near to breaking. For Guinan, the emergence of a spiritually darkened modern world is the natural result of a gradual process in which primordial spirituality and the truth to which it aspires have become more and more hidden and inaccessible. The downward spiral from higher to lower has created a host of antagonisms. Unity has become a multiplicity without center or purpose, while the sublimity of a wondrous spirituality has become a pedantic display of materialism, dressed in the pretensions of rationality. The intellectual witnessing of divine ideas has become the cognitive search for cold logic of facts. The multiple states of being in the hierarchical order of knowledge have been leveled. Spirit has become matter. Quality has been reduced to quantity. Pure intellectuality has degenerated into rationalism, or worse, sentimentality. The traditional sciences that found their legitimacy in the genuine sources of knowledge have disappeared just as surely as the prehistoric civilizations of Atlantis vanished through the cataclysm. So yeah, I mean, here is the notion of a fall. The downward spiral. The emergence of a spiritually darkened world. So yeah, I mean, we get this idea, this sense here that the primordial spirituality, I mean, is like the living thing. And it's just like over time, that primordial spirituality like evaporates, and then all we're left with is like empty formalisms that were once that were once animated by the primordial spirituality, but have since just become empty mechanical operations. I mean, and I think there's a lot of analogies that could be made here, right? I mean, just the idea, like, so for example, and one thing I like about Guanan is this idea of like this idea that there are different orders of reality, and basically each order has some representation of it, of some of the higher order. So to give an example from ordinary life, there's this notion of or I should say so for example, you enter a relationship with someone, right? And in the beginning, you have that primordial attraction to the other person, right? You know, and you feel the sparks. It's exciting. It's romantic. It's real. Like your hormones are, you know, pumping on on all cylinders. Like the attraction to that other person is rooted in a real natural forces. So then you enter the relationship, which is motivated by the primordial forces, if you will. But then over time, what happens, right, is that, you know, we enter the relationship and it just cools down. And we're no longer necessarily attracted to the other person through our primordial, through the forces, the biological forces of attraction, but we're now in a committed relationship. And so now we're like in a formal, our attraction, we aren't necessarily attracted to the person we've committed to now in later stages of the relationship, right? We're just in a formal structure. And so what we do, how we interact with our partner at that stage of the relationship, is not motivated by, you know, the primordial forces that were present in the beginning of the relationship, but now we are compelled to interact with, you know, our partner according to the expectations of the formal structure we are in, the structure of our relationship. So for example, now you bring home your girlfriend or your wife, you bring her home flowers, not because you are romantically infatuated with her, but you do it because you know it's expected as a token of your appreciation, and therefore you do it for that formal reason. But yeah, I mean, so, and yeah, I mean, and we experience this, right, as, you know, as if like, oh, the relationship's just dead, you know. And so this example, this I think is an example on a very low order of reality of what's happening at a very high level. And it makes a lot of sense. And we see, like, in the mystical in the reports of mystics seem to have some primordial experience, some primordial spiritual experience, that causes them to regurgitate the same sort of principles in different cultures and different times. And it's always the same message over and over and over and over again. But they use different symbols. So there seems to be a primordial spiritual experience that inspires people to produce religions, spiritual movements, and so on. And this is just repeating over and over again. And so there seems to be this cycle, right, where we stray away from this primordial spirituality. And what that does is it creates an increasingly lifeless civilization, where now everything is just a formalism. The love is gone. It's like in a relationship again. It's the same thing, but at a higher order. Okay. Part 2, the metaphysical world. Already in his first work, Introduction to the Study of the Hindu Doctrines, published in 1921 when he was only 36 years old, Guinan clearly identified the metaphysical foundation upon which his thought rests, with a certitude that he says is an intrinsic characteristic of intuitive knowledge. He affirms that metaphysics is essentially the knowledge of the universal, which he further clarifies as a knowledge of principles belonging to the universal order. The rest of Guinan's oeuvre can be seen as an identification of the universal principles that exist within the world of manifestation and form. In this perspective, which can be found particularly in the Hindu tradition, but also in Taoism and Buddhism, as well as in the more inward and esoteric dimension of Christianity and Islam, myths, rites, symbols, and the rhythms of nature are considered as signs of a higher order of knowledge, or as echoes of celestial ideas that in themselves are beyond form and words. As Guinan at one point clearly states, metaphysics, because it opens out a limitless vista of possibilities, must take care never to lose sight of the inexpressible, which indeed constitutes its very essence. Part 3, the Hindu world. Guinan understood Hinduism to represent a traditional order purely and exclusively that has no need to depend upon any more or less exterior form of organization, or upon the support of any authority other than that of the doctrine itself. Hinduism has the additional advantage of having arisen in a remote epoch in which the knowledge of metaphysical reality could be presented directly to the people of that time, living as they did in closer proximity to the primordial era that forms the velvet backcloth of Guinan's thinking. That Hinduism has come down into the modern era essentially unchanged, that it is a living tradition which still has the capacity to produce men and women of great sanctity, Guinan attributes in part to its having been founded and fully grounded upon the Vedic scriptures, and in part to the survival of the caste system, in which the Brahmins are the chosen safeguarders of the Hindu way of life. We are, however, reminded by Marco Paulus, one of Guénon's translators, that there is no question of Guénon choosing to write on a special subject, and that his writings might just as well serve as a key to the understanding of any of the traditional doctrines, or all of them. As for the Hindu doctrines themselves, they have simply been selected to exemplify the principles of workings of a traditional civilization. And traditional civilization means a hierarchy that represents the metaphysical hierarchy. That the top of the civilization, like the Brahmins, is the metaphysical, is supposed to embody, or is supposed to represent the metaphysical layer of reality. And then beneath the Brahmins, so the caste system is believed to represent the hierarchy of reality. That at the top you have the metaphysics, and then down from there you have the warriors, then the servants, and then the chandalas, just the material world, basically, the evil. So you have at the top of the society the transcendent, the bottom of the society you have basically the material. But of course, we as moderns abhor that idea, because we've seen decays of we've seen the decay of traditional civilization, where the people that were at the top of our civilizations didn't necessarily represent these lofty principles. So what you have is people at the top of society not representing, this noble aspect of man, but instead they represent, like deception, a grand deception, where we're all taken in. We all believe that these people at the top of society are great and they represent something really important, but then there enters this idea that no, like the people at the top are basically just monsters. They're deceivers. And it's almost the same idea with God, right? How we fell out with God. The big guy is we no longer look up to the big guy. And it's seen to be a deception, a trick that's actually harming us. And so basically the rejection of traditionalism is the same thing, really, because if you think about it, belief in God is a belief. So in the belief of God, there is a latent belief in hierarchy of beings. So if you believe in God, you in some sense you believe that there is something higher than you. There is some intelligence higher than you. And if you believe that, then is it so much of a stretch to believe that maybe your king or the Brahmins or the priests, that these also are higher than you? So there's a lot of skepticism, in the sense of like how these beliefs condition us to accept certain social forms of certain social hierarchies. And really, people would laugh at you today if you proposed, an organization of society based on metaphysical principles, that the top should represent something metaphysical, transcendent. But anyway, I've kind of run out of steam, and I don't think anyone has attended today. That's okay. I don't mind sitting here talking all by my lonesome about this stuff. You know, I think it's important. I think there's something really that we need to learn here. But of course, it just may be the case that we're too far in the cycle, and that we're not even the type of human being anymore that could appreciate such things. You know, I don't know really what the mentality here is about this. But anyway,